Okay, it's going live on Facebook. Taking a minute to load, but here we are. I need to close my door. Maisie, come here. Come on, out, out.
Okay,
all right. Good morning. We are live on Facebook on this beautiful Friday morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you live. I am Reverend Barbara Bew with Science of Mind magazine, and I am here today to spend a little time with Reverend Mike McMorrow from Granada Hills, California, who is the author of this newly released amazing little book called Blue Collar Spirituality: Finding a God That Works.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Welcome on. It's going to be fun. So my first question I got to ask you is, of all the books to write, there's lots of information out there in the universe. Of all the books to write, why is this your book?
Well, the science of mind has been a philosophy and way of life, has been such a transformational thing for myself. And after years of working in construction, both as a tradesman and then as a building contractor, I stumbled my way into religious science. And it really helped me get things sorted out. It had helped me to see where my own thinking was getting in our way. And I haven't really seen our teaching focused and addressed to working people. And I don't know why that is. And maybe the magazine did it, years before I was around. But I kept waiting to see it happen. And then one day I just realized, you know what, if someone's maybe it's going to have to be me. And so I gave it a shot. And I was actually I had, I don't know, several pages, maybe 40 to 60 pages of speaking to blue collar spirituality, right? So this was like 2010, 2011, and I'm seeing white collar people having the same experience as blue collar. So there's really, everyone's being subjected to these same market forces in this modern era. And so I just kind of felt like, I was writing to blue collar, and then I ended up taking and I wrote myself into a corner. And I was kind of waiting for someone who actually was a writer to speak to this, but nobody did. So then I took the writers boot camp with Jim Terrell, the CSL writers boot camp, and this kind of poured out of me with some good coaching. And then so now I'm speaking from blue collar spirituality, and I'm couching the principles in this narrative of my own working life.
Yeah, no, I love this because so concrete, you use concrete a lot as sort of a metaphor for life, and I really like that because I think I've even done a talk on that actually. Like, you set the forms, you pour the concrete spreads to the forms that you create, which is a great metaphor for life happens in the form we create in our mind, right?
Yes. And at the same time, if we don't take the time to get into that undisturbed natural soil, even the strongest foundation, we found this out in the Northridge earthquake, right? Where many of the structures in my area here where I'm from were severely damaged because they just rode on top of the loose soil, which is what we used to do, right? Because we don't have the freeze concerns that you would have, say, in Colorado, where you have to get down below the freeze line. But then that's getting into building rather than
but you know what? But it all works. It all works.
My point is that we want to do that work, right? Which for us would be the shadow work, right?
And the spiritual practice, yeah.
Right. Excavating the stuff we don't need, that's no longer serving us, right? To get to that undisturbed natural, which is the spirit as we understand that to be, which is the other thing I loved about the teaching, is that Holmes encourages us to see the divine everywhere.
Mhm.
And so this book really has been kind of also a bait and switch, because it is written mostly to men. And I don't even really bring up God concepts per se, and it's a short book until the starting in about the 4th chapter, and then really being more open about it in the 5th chapter, but speaking to it hopefully in broad and in kind of interfaith ways, even though I do introduce Buddhist concepts as well. But I try to give everybody an honorable mention in there at least.
Yeah, but you talk about the toolbox, which for us is basic spiritual practice. You talk a lot about you had a practice once you started to learn. You had a practice of 10 minutes before you started on a job site. So
Yeah.
why?
Well, and I should back up a little bit before that, because I was one of those guys that every time I went to class and we would do one of these exercises, I would nod off. I would totally fall asleep. We had a guy doing a self-hypnosis thing, right? And he was on fire with it. He was one of the guys in one of the few other men in our church. And we would get going, and I'd be, and so, and then one time so I would get really kind of caught up on it, and I would say, I've just kind of pitched the whole day idea of meditation. Well, I just, I can't do it because I fall asleep. And then I heard the Dalai Lama once said that sometimes sleep is the best meditation.
Mm.
And so that kind of took the pressure off. And then I just cut it down to 10 minutes. And like I address in the book, what I really came to see was, and frankly, this was coaching from my Science of Mind classes that I was getting, right? So I didn't stumble upon it on my own. But I noticed that I was much more effective on the days when I didn't do it. Like, I definitely noticed a difference.
Yeah.
And so it was having faith in just, well, I've tried everything else. Let me try this, right? It was like, as they say in 12-step, trying every conceivable remedy. Well, I tried everything but meditation.
It's like, I tried everything except not drinking, right?
Yeah. Who wants to sit still for 10 minutes when, we need another shot of espresso or something to get us going? So, yeah.
Well, and that practice is what builds. So we talked that when we talked about this a little bit the other day to get ready for this, we talked about, we were talking about how, like, building a house has kind of happened in the same order for a long time, because there's a learning and an experience that goes along with, this is where you start and then you do this. And so, like, the materials may have changed some as they've improved, the forms may have changed some as they have improved, but the basics always remain the basics. And I think sometimes in our teaching, like, we get off in all this fluffy stuff, and really the basics, meditate, pray. And it doesn't even have to be called meditation. Be mindful, pray.
Right. I think I call it quiet time. I don't know that I even call it meditation. I may, but I don't remember now. But
I don't think you do, actually.
I think I just call it being still, being quiet.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is all the same thing. But we turn it into, like, you somehow have to become some hour-long master meditator, and mostly, who has time for that?
Well, right. And we're not monks, right? As they say in Hinduism, we are householders.
Yeah.
So anyway, and at the same time, building also is subject to one law, one immutable law, and that is the law of gravity. Right. Yes. And so everything you do is, there are other laws also, but everything is, the way every beam is set, every stud is placed, every stone, is subject to the law of gravity. If you're an electrician, there's a law of electricity that you're playing with. If you're a hairdresser, there's chemistry that you're playing with, trying to get the right color. And oops, I went too far into the red zone. What do I do? Right. And the thing is that each one of these each one of these ways of working has expertise in it. And I also wanted to bring that up, that I wanted to raise this idea that there's dignity to work and there's
Oh my God, yeah.
dignity to labor in particular. And I kind of feel like in society that's kind of slipped away, right? So we haven't encouraged our sons and daughters to go into the trades because, you know, everybody thinks little Johnny's going to be design the next, what do you call it, Fortnite game or something. But the fact is most people do not finish college, and we need tradespeople. So I
Oh
think
my
that's
gosh,
another
around
part.
here,
I
yeah.
mean, we are now going to be working to decarbonizing the planet and decarbonizing America. So over the next 20 years, these are going to be great, you know, $25, $35 an hour jobs for journeymen that are going to require expertise. And so that's the other part of this, but mostly this idea that there's a power for good in the universe and we can use it to affect change for good in our life, right? So much of that in that early discovery is just learning how to get out of our own way, right? And
Yeah.
to bring infinite power, infinite intelligence, which is a lot. That's a lot of intelligence, right? And that nudge that we're getting inside to trust that, right? and to stop thinking that, oh, I don't have the education, or I'm just a carpenter. Like for many years I would say that to myself before religious science. I'm just a carpenter. And then I realized, wow, you know, there's actually not many guys who know how to do what I do at the skill level that I bring to it.
Right.
And,
How many people you know can build things? Like,
right. Well, I know lots of guys who can build things. It's just, can they build them well? And so, but you know, I can drive around the San Fernando Valley, and you know, I've worked on homes that were 10,000 square feet, and they're, you know, they're beautiful, you know, they're going to be there 100 years from now, right? So up until this book, that's been my legacy.
okay, so let's talk about that for just a second. So you build this thing that you can actually see, you see it for years. But what you're talking about in this book is building a life, and a life
Yeah.
for your family that is sustainable, joyful, fulfilled for your lifetime.
Right. Instead of drudgery and what's the use?
Right.
Because so many working people are so busy living their lives. So I start that the first chapter is about that. And in fact, the comments that I have gotten from the half dozen people who've read it and gotten back to me, because it just came out, have been about, you know, this isn't really a book about working men. This is a book about anyone who has a busy life. And so that's very gratifying, because I did, you know, Angela Carroll Brown, my editor, and I, we just stripped as much of the language out of there as we could so it would read fast. Because I know for myself, you know, you got me for about 15 or 20 minutes. And if you get too bogged down, you know, I'm going to put it away and maybe I'll get back to it. But I'm really hoping that, you know, we can set the hook early to at least get the guy or the gal now to those first exercises, but also for our practitioners and ministers and those who are connected with even the magazine. I'm hoping that the book will make the reader curious enough to go looking for a center and, you know, wow, where can I find people who think like this?
Yeah.
Right.
And
Because for years I was, religious science and new thought was all around me, but I didn't know it. I didn't know it until my 40s.
right.
And it, now, mind you, I had Emmett Fox around me because I stumbled upon that in a 12-step meeting. But
Oh, really?
this idea of scientific Christianity, and that was kind of a stretch for me then, where I was in consciousness, because I was so tied into my religion of origin, and everything went through that filter, right? but Holmes really addresses that beautifully, because I also loved Eastern thought, right? So I grew up in Hippieville, up in came of age up in Port Townsend, Washington, right? And that was the be here now kind of thing. And my dad, when he came up and visited, he goes, I always wondered where the hippies went after Haight-Ashbury. Now I know. And so, but I didn't know how to integrate all of that. And Holmes helped me do that.
He was like the great integrator. And you grew up in a military family, right?
Oh yeah.
So,
an Irish military family. Yeah, my dad's an Irish immigrant. In fact, the publisher, it's a self-published book, and Cornmore Publishing is a nod to my dad. Cornmore is the area that he's from. It's in the middle of this road between Glenfarne and Kilty Clogher in Leitrim, where my cousin is now raising sheep and his family. And so it's, yeah, and so he did really well, I have to say. Very humble beginnings, and ended up as a flight engineer in the Air Force and in aviation for, 40, 50 years of his working life. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So, but the structure, right? So just as a contrast, so my dad would say, I don't know how you do this. The thing that after the way that I was raised, I needed the structure of knowing what was, my job and what was expected of me and how much money I was going to get, right? Because I would have tens of thousands of dollars out there in the summer, right? And
yeah,
and he would go with me and on these sites, and he would just watch me navigate through all of this. And I became so much more effective as a building contractor and as a tradesman because of this teaching. And so I really wanted to present a narrative where we wove this through it, the science of mind I'm speaking to, and without getting too esoteric. And it really is kind of a hammer and nails approach.
Right.
There are places where I
take
a deep dive. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Build a life that works.
Yes.
And here's some simple tools. The same way as you build a house that stays up further, that you can look at. Here's some simple tools that you can follow. And you have really great exercises in your book. Let's talk. You built in some basic questions for people to sit and hammer on a little bit in their own minds. Here, I'm trying to help with the
I appreciate that,
because I'm such a contractor. But I used to build things. So I love this. You say, so while I've been espousing for close to 100 pages that there is a power for good in the universe available to everyone, in these times, you and I are going to have to step up and be the agents for this power to assert itself in the human realm. Now, that's one of the, this is after you kind of break into a little more out of the basics and into what's possible.
Right.
What do you think is possible? If we take the idea of, the working folks really starting, and I have to say out here, where I am, we have a lot of these I have farmers, first generation off the farm folks in my community who really love the building blocks of this teaching and how they work, because you get results. I mean, how did your life change? And, you're talking a little bit about, well, yeah, my life got better, but really, how did your life change, you, Mike McMorrow, when you applied this stuff to your life?
Well, I think number one was through learning. Well, I guess first I was willing to experiment with the possibilities, because the other thing that Holmes says is, don't take my word for it, prove it for yourself.
Yes.
Right. And so I said, okay, so let me pretend like God really is good. And that, right? What if God really is good?
How hard was it to get that? I grew up.
What if God is not a sky god with a judge and executioner and judging me for this finite human life, but rather, what if God is looking to have an experience of itself by means of my life, right? So then the next question would be, my life, me? Because I can think of all the ways where I'm, as I say in the book, where I'm more ain't than saint, right? and and but that has nothing to do with it. What I think about that has nothing to do about it, because when you come to see that the Spirit is everywhere, including right where I am, and including right where you are, right? Then and I practice at seeing the Spirit in all things, right? So then those my old homophobic ways, they fall away, right? Whatever residual biases I had about race or women, right? Because I have, I have a history there, right? Like, I mean, it really does read like a somebody done somebody wrong song, right? So, and I was kind of done with that. I was tired of the struggle, I guess.
And
right?
you talk a little bit about having some anger and some frustration and
Right.
some.
Well, and I was, I still have a strong attachment to profanity. Anyone who knows me, I try to keep the F-bombs to a minimum, but I was, so let's just take that one area. I remember after being away from home for several years, I came home and I was talking at the kitchen table with my mom and stuff. And all of a sudden she had this, just shocked look on her face. I'm like, what's wrong, Mom? She goes, you don't even hear yourself, right? So I'm just dropping F-bombs and this and that here and there. It had worked its way into my conversation because I was working around men all day and there was nothing reining that in anymore. So that's where I was, let's say, in the 80s. And then after, I think I was a practitioner by this time, maybe even a minister. I was helping my customer. We were all done with his job. We've been at his house for a couple months, and I'm helping him light the water heater. And I'm, effing this and GD and that. And he finally says, gosh, I've never heard you cuss before. And I'm like, what, really? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, I'm a new minister. Maybe this stuff is rubbing off. And he goes, I kind of thought there must be something going on there because I was really surprised that you never swear. And I was just like, wow, really? So, I mean, even in that arena, and I didn't even set out to do that, right? I didn't set out to be more respectful of women. I didn't set out to be more respectful of I didn't set out to be joyous when other people, had a big hit financially, right? So that envy, all that stuff just kind of worked itself away by simply focusing on the idea that God is everywhere present, which is kind of a trip. I mean, it is a bait and switch, right?
Well, it is kind of it takes a little while to absorb it. If you've grown up in a more traditional Christian environment, it takes a long time to unravel, some of that thing of the judging. But you also come to realize in that you get to hold yourself accountable.
Yes.
And that if you're creating your life and your thinking's creating your life, then you get to be responsible for your results to some degree.
Right.
To be gentle.
Absolutely. Well, yes. Because if our thinking creates our reality, then it really is all about self-responsibility.
Right.
So it's interesting that this teaching that we have is very much in alignment with conservative, politically conservative principles. I mean, it really is.
In some ways, yeah. In some ways.
So we pay, we suffer our own consequences, right? So the beauty of Holmes is speaking to this law of cause and effect in a way that is accessible rather than just, well, what comes around goes around, which is very passive, to a much more active way. And in this moment, right? The payoff is in this moment.
Right.
And the tendency of our thinking, paying attention to it, taking responsibility for it, to the tendency of our thinking, we can shift and lift the tendency of our thought into something that's more uplifting and affirming. And I really do think that this teaching, however it gets out there, is going to be key for transforming the planet if everyone else can kind of look for ways to agree rather than disagree. So we have a really big challenge ahead of us right now, right? So do we have within us, right? So we have this conservative teaching. Do we have enough within us, in this conservative mindset, to also hold some progressive principles, right? Do we have, I think Holmes just kind of, he grew up in a Judeo-Christian ethic. And I think there was just this presumption that this was kind of the law of life. This is the playing field that we're on. But when you think about Holmes, number one, he came from the farm, right? So he knew what hard work was. He went through the market crash of 29. He went through the Depression. He watched the unfolding of the New Deal. I don't know what he thought about that, but he lived through that. He lived through World War II and the splitting of the atom, and yet managed to create the institute that was the vessel for this teaching to make itself known.
Right.
And now it's kind of, the torch is passed, and we're kind of tweaking it a little bit here and there where we need to. And I think
we got to talk about, we have to be able and willing at this point, because we know things now that we didn't know before.
Right.
We know that we got to work on equality and equity. We know that we have to work on compassion.
Well, and that's the other reason for the book here, right? Because the next big step, as Dr. King pointed out, is it's one thing to have a social justice intention, but underlying all of that needs to be access for income equality so that all people are raised, which, the World War II generation really did. I mean, they really set the table for us. And then, we started playing around with some other ideas that folks could argue whether they worked or they didn't. But so this book is for working people. I'm really hoping that the ministers out there will give it a read to see. I'm going to start experimenting on how to bring working people into our centers, which of course now means into our Zoom calls.
Into our Zoom calls, yeah.
Right. And the way it's written, you really can structure a class, because you have there's questions at, easy, right? So for someone who's steeped in the science of mind, they're really kind of, softball lobs, right? But at the same time, if you've been busy, as I was and most working people are, it may be the only time somebody takes the time to think about that.
Yep.
And to think about what it means for them, not through the filter of their marriage, their family, their religion, their boss, their affiliations with various things. And I know we've been talking a lot about building, but there's not a lot of building in there. It's just, there are stories that kind of help illustrate. And so the feedback that I'm getting is that women mostly have been reading it so far, is they can relate to a lot of it, which is very gratifying, right?
Well,
which is kind of funny, because I grew up, I have 7 brothers and 1 sister, and then I worked in an industry that had all men, but all my staff ministers are women, so they've been working me now for coaching me up for 10 or 12 years.
Get some of those rough
and my teacher was, Dr. Maureen Hoyt. So,
So we're gonna wrap this up. We're about out of time. What do you guys, your chapter 4, the answer is in your hands. I think that sums this entire thing up beautifully.
Yeah.
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 We're here to create a world that works.
Yes.
And a life that works.
A life that works. I'm actually using this book as our September series. I'm veering off of the CSL talk titles. So this Sunday, I will be reprising my spirituality and the recovering redneck for our home, because they've never heard that, our home group.
Nice.
And so that's the prologue to the book. And then we're just going to use these chapters to kind of explore these ideas and see what we can do with it.
So the link to the book is on this Facebook page that you have been watching. Appreciate your time. Love talking with you. I could talk with you for hours, as we've demonstrated before. And and you know, great success to you in this. Not, you know, I think you've hit on something here.
Thank you, Reverend Barbara. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the opportunity of the magazine to let me, you know, pitch my wares a bit. And if anyone wants to get a hold of me, you know, you can, you know,
they'll find you
online.
You're easy to Google.
Hills.
Yeah. You are a Googleable dude. All right, we're going to wrap this up now. Lots of love to you, and have having a great Labor Day weekend.
Yes.
Actually,
yeah, I have the official launch is on Monday, Labor Day.
Nice.
So it'll be during a Facebook Live during my noontime prayer. So.
All right. We'll see you there.
Peace. Stay safe and strong at home.